Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum, folks. Welcome to those who have come. We have quite a few questions this time. I think there's 5 or 6 of them. And I worked through the ones that I got online first, and then we'll kind of take it from there, and we'll carry on until we're done. I've also put the questions on the chat of this meeting. I think it's just an easy way of dealing with the material. So if you're interested, then please have a look at the chat, and you can see the questions as I talk about them, and you can also add questions to the chat then if you would like. So I'll start with Abbas Kizelbash. His question. He asked, is considering one's belief to be correct or superior to another not in itself a veil? I mean, is it a path of self-discovery using one's own faculties, a rule? Is it a path of self-discovery using one's own faculties, a rule-based defined way to be exactly followed, or is the latter a means to the former? So I'm a little bit confused about the end of that question, Abbas. I think what we're exploring here is this issue of, is my conviction that I'm right not in itself a problem and a veil? And I think with all of these things, in fact, there were a number of questions in this that arose that actually they point to a paradox. I beg your pardon. What I mean by this is they point to things that seem to be mutually exclusive. I mean, can you have a sense of conviction and at the same time, can you have an open mind? Particularly with matters like belief. I mean, we say, for instance, we said that on this journey, on this path, the character of a person who's on this path is that the nature of the internal dialogue is one of curiosity rather than judgment. And that the first thing you need to forego if you want to really explore the depth of your own being is these really rigid convictions about how the world sort of functions. And you need to replace the ongoing commentary you have on the world. We all have ongoing commentary on the world. I mean, eventually we actually want to transcend that commentary, but you need to, at least in the medium term, replace that ongoing commentary of the world from one which is rooted in judgment and disapproval to one that is rooted in curiosity. That softens your sense of boundary, your sense of who you are. We have explored this matter once before. We said, if your commentary about the world says infinitely more about you than it does on the world. It says about what you consider to be valuable, what you consider to be right and wrong, and so on. So if you want to transcend your own boundaries, your own conditional motive, then the way to do that is to soften your commentary on the world and to make it kinder, to make it more rooted in curiosity and compassion rather than judgment and disapproval. So that is true. However, does it mean to say that I then, I beg your pardon, my voice is giving up on me. Does that mean to say that I then forego any sense of conviction that there is a creator, that there is a Rabb, and that these materialists who are currently sort of run the establishment of the world have a right to have their view, or should have a view, or that they're kind of at some level correct? And I don't think that's true. I think I can have a kind disposition to the world and be completely convinced that there is a Rabb. Be completely convinced that my good fortune is the outcome of an ingenuity which is bigger than mine, that I cannot account for. And that in that sense, the materialists have it wrong, and that they are not only mistaken, that they are astray, that they are causing mischief and damage with their view. I think it's entirely possible to still maintain that conviction that the materialists are astray and they're causing damage with their view, that the kuffar and the unbelievers are astray and that they're causing damage with their view, and at the same time have a reasonably open mind about the world that I'm in. Yeah, thank you. Then from Zoltan, so I think we touched on this matter in London when we saw each other last week, Zoltan, and I suspect that what I said wasn't entirely satisfying. So I'll give it another crack. And it's this issue about the relationship between outcomes and process, or goals and doing what's appropriate. So the question is, what is the appropriate relationship to a goal? He says, I understand the fact of its necessity in providing a process, but how is that held in the heart? There seems to be an implied need for an attachment to it, or else it would not be meaningful, and hence not remain an aim. Do I make an intention and forget about it as far as possible? For myself, it seems to be that constant reminders are required to focus my activity in general towards an outcome, or get lost and become a bit useless. But of course, that builds attachment, and when there is a failure, it can be heartbreaking. And yet, the attachment provides the drive and the energy to move forward. So, a bit of a rock and a hard place. And that's the question. I think it's useful to by way of metaphor, to think about the relationship between outcomes and process, like the relationship between what happens on a scoreboard and what happens on a field in a team sport like soccer or football. Now, fundamentally, we know that there are two ways of playing a game. You can play a game in such a way that the only important thing is to win. And you see this very often in kids' sport. You know, as when my sons were small, they all played football. And there were some parents who got so wound up as to, whether these kids were winning or not, that they would run up and down the side of the field and abuse the kids and abuse the ref, and just behave like hooligans, really. And it created the condition that the kids actually stopped enjoying the game. I mean, it was just awful, because everything was about the result. And then it gets to the point where everything is about the result, to the point where actually you no longer, the ends justify the means. So if you can get away with fouling an opponent, then you would, for example. The other way of playing football is to actually enjoy the time on the field, to make the point of the game, the playing of the game, and not necessarily just the result. Now, when you get kids who play like that, when they play for the love of playing, they actually start to play particularly well. I mean, they start to enjoy the game, and they start to have a real interest in the process of the game and the process of playing the game well. So there's where's the attention? What gets the weight? The score or playing the game well? Now, what's interesting is that these two things obviously are not disconnected. I mean, it's not the only, but one of the criteria you have to work out whether you're playing the game well is, what's the score? But it is one of many, and it is not exclusive, and it is not the purpose of the game. It is almost the excuse to get onto the field, is to pursue the score. So of the two moments, the process of playing the game and the score, what's on the scoreboard, what gets the weight, what do you make significant? What you make significant is the playing of the game. But you cannot have a good game if it's absolutely aimless. So, to take the metaphor even further, it is clear that as a player on the field, you always have the goal in mind. But actually, if you want to be a good player, you don't always try and gun the goal yourself. I mean, you do what you can to set your colleague up to succeed. In other words, you play the game in such a way that you don't always have the goal, the scoreboard in mind. You have the next step in mind, and you play the next step well. There is an alignment between the next step and the total outcome, but you increasingly put emphasis on the next step. So we have these two variables. There's the playing of the game, and then there's the result. And where you put the weight is really a matter of your own intent. You can put all of the weight on the result and make the game the miserable price you have to pay to get a result, or you can put all of the emphasis on playing the game and playing the game well and enjoying playing the game, and allow the scoreboard to kind of give you some context for how you play the game. And that's a question of choice. And the second doesn't require you to completely forego the scoreboard. It's just saying that the scoreboard is not the point. The playing of the game is the point. And I think that's how one can view using that as a metaphor. You can look at any relationship between process and outcome. You can do things in order to win and achieve, or you can do things for the love of doing them. You can be a trader, and you can negotiate in order to get as much out of your opponent as you can for giving as little as possible, or you can negotiate in the spirit of trying to find a fair price. In other words, to find what is the right thing to do in the situation that you're in. Any moment has those two possibilities. You do things to do them well, or you do things just to get an outcome. What we also have to understand about that binary is that actually what shifts as we mature is an incremental move. So it's not like you start day one completely goal-directed, and then day two you have this epiphany and you completely forego outcome. What happens as you mature is that there's an incremental shift from the degree to which you make the purpose of what you're doing an outcome, and the degree to which what you make the purpose of what you're doing to do the thing well. So we spoke about this thing about walking up the mountain. One way of walking up the mountain is to walk to get to the top of the mountain. And the other way of walking up the mountain is to say, the top of the mountain is my means to have a good walk. Which means that having a good walk requires the top of the mountain. The emphasis is in the walking. And amazingly, in my experience, when you walk like that, when you make the purpose of what you're doing things to do them well, outcomes are kind of assured. And in fact, you normally get maximal outcomes. But when your attention is only on the outcome, the process that you're busy with trips you up. If that still requires some clarification, Zoltan, you can pick it up again at another time. So from Rifat, can you expand for us on how one can access that which is behind the window of perception? So I'm assuming you're looking at a screen right now. And so there's, in the middle of your field of vision, there's probably an image on the screen. And then if you're focusing on the screen and what's slightly out of your focus, but still in your field of vision, would be the total square of the screen. And if you continue focusing on what's inside on the whatever you're looking at in the screen, but then be aware of the whole picture that's presented to you. In other words, everything that's in your field of vision, both what you're focusing on and what's in your peripheral vision. You then get a sense of the thing that we refer to as the window of perception. The window of perception is kind of contained by the boundary within which everything that you perceive, at least visually, gets presented to you. And that whole thing you can call the outward. It's the world you look into. The question is then, well, how does one get access to the inward? In other words, what is behind here? And I think the first truth about that is that it becomes problematic if you try and do it visually, because vision always wants an object. And this is saying I want to explore the this end of experience, the here of experience, rather than the there of experience. And the only way to do that for me is to do it, in a sense, by feel. And this is not it's not as obscure as it sounds. If you just maybe even close your eyes so that just allow your attention to feel the back end, just feel where your attention is coming from. You'll get a sense of spaciousness, a sense of depth, and the quieter you get, the more you will find yourself, if you like, resting into, sinking into that depth. That's why very often when people speak about meditative practice or muraqabah, they'll speak about gaining depth and experience of depth. And it's just that you, in a sense, you feel that you are sinking further and further back from the window of perception. One of the attributes of that is that the nature of the internal dialogue that you have becomes more and more dreamlike and less crisp. So if you're very conscious, you're stuck up right against the window of perception, the nature of what's going on of the sort of on the inside is very crisp. It's very definite, or at least you're only aware of that, which is very crisp and very definite. That's a better way of phrasing it. But the quieter you get, like in deep contemplative states, in deep howl, the more you sense almost like the whispering that's normally there becomes increasingly, you experience it more. And then the nature of what goes on inside you is quite indistinct. It's sort of fleeting, not very crisp thought at all, very cloudy, and then you know that you're going deeper, because the nature of your experience is not crisp. It is more fleeting and more ethereal almost. When you get quiet and you in sort of a bit of almost like a dreamlike state, and you have this experience that you can't quite grasp the thoughts, they're sort of floating, then you know you are accessing that which is behind the window of perception more. It's also a growing skill. So the quieter you get, the deeper you go, the deeper you can go. And it is a skill that most of us actually do need to work on. It doesn't just happen spontaneously. Thank you, Rifat. From Sidi Abdallah, you spoke about the nature of the intent to give paradigm, and giving isn't just about being nice. So there we understand. At times I struggle with discerning what my intent is in specific moments, where giving what is appropriate might coincide with giving the intention to get paradigm, an outcome-wise at least. At such a junction, one starts to be in doubt and is almost paralyzed as to what the appropriate thing is to do after all, fearing that the nafs is dressing up in an altruistic robe to be more at ease with its self-serving pursuits. I was wondering if you may kindly suggest a way of dealing with composite intentions and the quest for sincerity. Especially, it seems that if one's default when in doubt is about the intention of an action is not to act altogether. All right. However, this sometimes tends to be blameworthy and may similarly miss the mark. Wow, that's a subtle one, Abdullah. So I'm just going to paraphrase this. Sometimes I can justify to myself I might think I'm acting on the basis of what is right, but I'm actually doing something expedient that really is about managing an outcome, and I'm justifying it to myself that it is right. And I'm so nervous to then act on the basis of what it seems to be a justification that I don't act. So I think if remembering that understanding how we mature as through the lens of intent is only one way of understanding maturation. So, in other words, intent isn't, it's not a foolproof kind of tool. We do know that what we've described before, really, that our intent moves when we're born from an absolute I'm here to get. You know, at birth, the infant has had nothing yet. Whatever the infant is going to get, it will still get. And then at death, I'm here to give. You can't take anything with you. And so that's almost like a natural maturation process, starting at a point where we're unconditionally here to get, to a point where we're required to give unconditionally. And we have a lifetime in between. And that lifetime in between is really about mixed motive. I mean, if you consider how one matures through from absolutely unconditionally here to get to absolutely unconditionally here to give, then there's sort of various shades of gray, going dark, lighter, 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 lighter to absolute light. And then as we go through this, we're basically, there's in a sense a clarification of our intent. There's a clearing of our intent. There's sort of various shades of gray going from dark to light. And if you think about a shade of gray, then basically it's a mix between light and dark. So what we've been arguing is that there's an incremental shift in the mix of your intent as you mature, going from absolute dark to absolute light. So what that means is that none of us are angels. We are all struggling with this thing of what is the appropriate thing to do. And it is gray, it is not clear, it is nuanced. Sometimes it is clear, but more often than not, it isn't clear. And actually, the process of being human is really one of clarifying. In other words, it only becomes clear when we contend with this matter and we struggle with it and we act. So what that means is that if you look at any situation that you're in this journey of clarifying of our intent, in any moment, there's these two possibilities. What's the right thing to do? What do I want to get? And what's the, what should I'm sorry, what's in my own interests? I beg your pardon. What's the expedient thing to do? What I'm trying to get? And what's the right thing to do? How can I contribute? Now, what does happen is that when I act on the basis of the first, what am I trying to get? Then I create the conditions where I feel over a period of time that I'm stagnating. And it's by the rule that says if you want something from the other's ability to withhold what you want gives the other power over you. So if I'm trying to act on the basis of if I'm acting on the basis of what I want to get, I will find that the other defines self. I get stuck. When I do what's appropriate, I'm acting for something which is bigger than my self-interest. I rise out of myself and I transform, literally transform. My form softens and it changes into something else. When I act on the basis of what is the appropriate thing to do in the situation, then I go beyond my conditional motive, my conditioning, and then that part of my conditioning no longer operates. So my shape becomes thinner. I transcend myself. And I therefore take an incremental step in this clarification journey of clarifying my intent. That means that, particularly when it is not clear, it is still useful to act, because how else are you going to find out whether your motive is conditional or not? Also, what it would be an appropriate thing at one point of your journey of maturation will not be an appropriate thing at a different point in your journey of maturation. So for instance, for a young adult who is still has the role of being the provider, it is appropriate for them to take care of older people. For an old person who's becoming infirm and weak, it is appropriate for them to accept the care of older people, of younger people. So there's a point where it is appropriate to take care of, and that there's a point that it is appropriate to allow yourself to be taken care of. So you cannot say there's an absolute rule to this. There's what is appropriate at one point of your maturation is not going to be appropriate in another point of your maturation. So the issue isn't to necessarily want to come out with an absolutely correct answer every time. Oh, I have to be sure. I'm going to work this thing out like an arithmetic problem, and there'll be an equal sign. On the other end of that equal sign, there'll be the right thing to do. The thing is to understand that the whole of your life is an equation. And every step of the equation is just an introduction to a new problem, where there'll be yet another thing to resolve. That it's a step on the way, that it isn't about getting things absolutely right or absolutely wrong. And I think that one gets the sense of being stuck and not being able to act because you're convinced that at some point there's an absolute rightness and an absolute wrongness about things. And I don't think it's very rarely as clear as that. I mean, that mostly we're contending, we're struggling. And it is the honest attempt to act consistently with what's the right thing to do. That is what allows us to clarify our intent. And what should our intent be in the final analysis? It's actually not to give unconditionally. It is to receive unconditionally. We've said that outward action is about generosity and courage. That is supported by an inner state of gratitude and trust. It is the gratitude and trust that is primary, not the generosity and courage. It is so your whole life is designed to produce an inner state, and that's an inner state of being convinced that you've been the recipient of a blessing that's in excess of your due, and being convinced that you have a Rabb, who is your benefactor and your ally, who will protect you. That's the point of a life. And it's having that first-hand experience is why we have a life. That's the point of arrival. Not always trying to act to the benefit of others is a means to that end. It is not the end. Yeah, and then there's one last one from Musa, from the Zawia, Musa Mulabatsi. And again, this is one of these, the kind of question that can get somebody like myself into deep trouble. He says, how do I reconcile the infinitude of Allah's mercy with the infinitude of hellfire? Because we believe that clearly, I mean, Allah is infinitely merciful. At the same time, there is such a thing as eternal damnation. So I'd like to suggest a couple of ways of dealing with this conundrum. And there are suggestions, and there are ways that I sort of would like to think about the matter and navigate around the problem. I'm not saying that this is truth, like the sun comes up in the east is truth. This is my dealing with this issue. I think in the first instance, there's we have to understand that existence is paradoxical. That so many things that are true of nature and existence and of Allah's nature and of reality are the things that are mutually exclusive that are simultaneously true. It is a little bit like this idea of light being either photons or waves, packets of energy or waves. They're both sensible descriptions of the world. They're mutually exclusive descriptions of the world that can be simultaneously true. Another way of trying to understand this is that to say that you only have one life, and yet there's a life that there's a life to that. How can I say there's a hereafter, and that's they're put as opposites, but they're not necessarily mutually exclusive. I mean, like this issue of eternal damnation. If we say, think about your experience of time is sequential, and that's how we are as human beings. And we can think back to our earliest memory, and then we look forward to the future and death. There's this sort of sequencing of moments, from one moment being replaced by another moment, being replaced by another moment. But then there's a final moment. And the point about a final moment is that it's like a flat line, right? There's sort of, you can see there's a rhythm, and then there's a final moment where that moment does not have a moment behind it. In that sense, it's an infinite moment. And now, if I made the purpose of my life my own aggrandizement, what I've accumulated, when I face that final moment, basically it is everything that I've constructed meaning on. It's like ripped out of my hands, because I'm not asked. I can't take any of the toys with me. I'm not asked, but what have I accumulated? I'm asked, how eloquently can I lose everything unconditionally? So if I've made my life, the purpose of my life, my accumulation, and whatever that accumulation is, either in terms of significance or possessions or whatever, then I will experience that final moment as an unutterable horror, because it means the complete annihilation of meaning. And the point about that horror is that it doesn't have a moment behind it, because I step into infinity, I step into timelessness. So that's like an endless moment of horror frozen timelessly. If I've made the purpose of my life the contribution I can make, and in every situation I act on the basis of what I can give, when I face that final moment, being able to hand over everything unconditionally. This is like the difference between the great act of having everything ripped from me or the great act of giving, which is by definition an ecstatic experience, a joyful experience, and that experience also has nothing behind it, which means it is also an eternal, joyful experience. So you don't have to I'm not saying there isn't an afterlife, but you don't have to posit an afterlife to know that there's such a thing as eternal damnation and eternal joy. It is, in fact, our whole understanding of the hereafter is completely clouded by our very peculiarly human engagement with time. But how do you deal with something that is truly of infinite proportion? Maybe one can say that there is an experience which is apparently timeless, which is an experience of horror. We do know that, dying can be an experience of horror. There are people with near-death experiences. There are some people who say that they had a horrible, an experience of unutterable horror. This can happen. So there's, but you also entered a realm where time is nonsense. I mean, what is this, clicking of hours over a period of time? So I think one can say that there's a point where you enter timelessness, which can be a moment of horror. But in the final analysis, don't we say, Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un? We have come from him and we'll go back to him. And what is that nature that we're going back to? Surely that nature is all-encompassing mercy and ecstatic joy. So possibly when all things are done and all the stories are wrapped up, then we will enter a place of final solicitude. It's just the process of getting there we might experience as truly timeless. And we have metaphor for this in our own day-to-day lives. I mean, I've often been in situations where the suffering that I was enduring seemed like it would never end. It was just, if your suffering in a moment is intense enough, it really becomes all-consuming. It does appear like it's going to be forever, ever. So maybe it's like that. Maybe this whole idea of infinite states of felicity and bliss and infinite states of damnation and horror, these are kind of almost metaphorical explorations in trying to give us some toolage to understand or to get some sense of experience, which isn't the current experience that we have now, but it's experienced by the way of metaphor of our current experience. Right now, we are bound in time. So if somebody says there's such a thing as timeless horror, where everything gets burnt, or your skin gets burnt off you and gets replaced, your boundaries get stripped off and replaced, that yes, that makes absolute sense. But at some point the boundaries are gone. Or there's such a thing as eternal felicitude, where your boundaries, you experience the delight of your boundaries softening, experiencing yourself as becoming one with the vast and the Rabb and the eternal. So I think that the problem is trying to reconcile two things which are apparently opposites, which are fundamentally true. So I think Allah's mercy is fundamentally true, and I think the damnation is fundamentally true. Eternal damnation is fundamentally true. But of the two, for me, the affirmation always in the final analysis, once all the equations are worked out, in the final analysis, the affirmation has to be the final truth. Because before all started, there was the Rabb, which has to mean that after all has ended, there will be the Rabb, which means that the yes is bigger than the no. Thank you. So there's a final question from Rahina. If a mature family member wishes not to have contact, is it best to respect this or to continue to try to make contact and face repeated rejection? Sure. Maybe I can speak out of my own experience. I had a very alienated relationship with one of my elder brothers for a very long period of time. probably for about 20 years, where I had that experience over a period of time of, wanting to kind of make contact and approach him, and then that being rejected. I did so less and less frequently over a period of time. I did, eventually I just thought this is an irresolvable matter. And then at some point, the matter just miraculously resolved itself. Then one day he just contacted me, and it was like we were never there was never disputed. It was very strange, the whole experience. So, I mean, obviously, I know nothing about the context that you're in, about the situation that you had. In a similar situation, I was always wanting to make contact, and that contact became less over a period of time. But there was always an element like that, and a willingness to make contact. And then at some point, Allah resolved the matter for me. I mean, I can't say what's the nature of the dispute. Is there disapproval of you legitimate? What have you done to them? I mean, obviously I know nothing like that. So maybe you can make contact with them infrequently enough so it doesn't get too upsetting when they reject you, and just hope that Allah at some point will resolve the matter. Thank you very much. Assalamu alaikum. Right, folks. I think that's us. That's us done. Those are the questions. Would anybody like to ask something else before we pack it in?
Assalamu alaikum, Sheikh.
Wa alaikum salam, Linda.
How are you, everybody? You okay, Sheikh? I wanted to add something to what you just said, Sheikh, but more like as a question, though. I did hear your brother's story, and I must say that when I heard it, it was the title was it was like sometimes the title, like when you presented it to us, when I heard it, I was like, maybe sometimes we don't have to think we have to do as many things that we think we are doing. So, for example, with my mom, it's a very good question, and I really wanted to speak about that. It's so weird. It's there with us today. I entered Islam, so even though she had a Nigerian background, it was really hard for her to accept me. And subhanallah, 24 years later, I still struggle with her a lot. But every time, I really try to say to myself, what you taught us, really, just put the finger on you as a person, Linda, and try to see how you can do things better for her, because obviously she's old, and you need to do this part of a bit worried in a sense, be good to her. But there is also something I do, Sheikh, and this is my question. I also protect myself from her. Because I know she's struggling with me as the person I became, I do respect her. But because my mental health can be also at stake, I also saw that distance is good between me and her. And I know that one day Allah will resolve it the same way, like the story you told us, but maybe now is not the time. And but I also protect myself, and I do feel a bit guilty about that sometimes. So my question is we ask Allah to put always the best between us, because we're not supposed to be people of conflict, are we? We're supposed to be people of peace, okay? But sometimes people opposite to us could be very, very, very hard with us. So how to find that balance, if you know what I mean? Thank you, Sheikh.
Linda, I think, I mean, that's, I'm tempted to say yes. I mean, you gave enough content to the question that I mean, I do agree that you don't have to make yourself the punching bag for somebody. and that you do what you can to kind of maintain the relationship insofar as it's possible. But if it's too difficult, then you put a boundary there. You don't allow too much of your life to get absorbed by this particular conflict. So I think yes, I mean I think you had it correct. You said spot on.
Okay, Jazakallah. Thank you very much. And it's actually very good to see you once a month, Sheikh. So let's keep doing that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. All right, folks, thank you. If there's nothing else, then I think we can wrap it up. Good.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sheikh. Thank you. Assalamu alaikum, everybody. Salam, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam.